You're listening to Florida Matters. I'm Matthew Petty. Do you remember the first time you took an Uber? The rideshare company has been in the Tampa Bay region for about 10 years now. It's so commonplace we use Uber as a verb, and it's a point of reference for other newer startups in the gig economy. When it arrived, Uber was a game changer, but it also disrupted the taxi industry and opened up the gig economy, offering people a way to make extra money on their own schedule. But it hasn't all been smooth driving since then. Last year, Uber and Lyft drivers in Tampa joined a nationwide strike, calling for higher wages. Coming up, you'll hear a conversation about how Uber fits into the gig economy of Tampa Bay and what keeps drivers on the app despite the challenges.
That's a business that's pretty consistently growing, across the board. And a big component of that is the fact that more and more people are moving into our state. And that the Tampa Bay area particularly has grown so much in the last 10 years since Uber launched.
You'll hear more from Harvey Corioso, Public Affairs Director for Uber, in about 20 minutes. First, though, a conversation about what it's like for drivers and about Uber's impact on the gig economy in Tampa Bay. We're joined by Ashley Girbal Kritzer, business reporter and real estate editor for the Tampa Bay Business Journal. Ashley, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
We're also joined by Jonathan Rigsby, author of Drive, Scraping By in Uber's America. Jonathan, thank you.
It's a pleasure to be here.
And Dragana Mrvos, a professor of political science and international studies at the University of Tampa. She spent a few months as an Uber driver in Tampa for research while writing a paper, Surveillance, Capitalism and Control of Work, a study of Uber in Tampa Bay. And that paper will be published as a chapter in an upcoming book on gig work. Dragana, thank you so much for being here as well.
Thank you very much for hosting me.
Well, first of all, Uber has been around for a while, and in fact, it kind of dominates the landscape in terms of gig work, right? People talk about the Uber of this or the Uber of that when they're launching something new in the gig space. It started in 2009, I think, in San Francisco. It came to Florida in 2014, so it's been here for more than a decade. And according to some stats, ride-sharing in the United States is worth about $54 billion, expected to grow to about $61 billion by the end of the decade. I want to just ask you, Ashley, for a start, do you kind of remember what that was like when Uber arrived in Tampa? What was that event like for you?
Oh, I remember it so well. My editor in Jacksonville, Tim Gibbons, I remember seeing him prepare a story in Jacksonville because Uber actually came to Jacksonville first. And it was very ignorant on my part. I said, what's Uber?
Mm-hmm.
Who would care? And then in Tampa in 2014, when Uber arrived, it was such a controversy. And it's so strange to remember now that it's such a part of our daily lives. But there was a transportation commission and taxi drivers that were so very opposed to the ride sharing coming in, and there were all sorts of regulations that were going to be imposed, and eventually all of that just went away. But it was a very controversial, very heated topic.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any kind of sense of how big it is as sort of part of the economy in the Tampa Bay region?
I think that would be almost impossible to gauge, to put a number on it. I will tell you, I left my office building today around 11 a.m. And when I came back, there were multiple gig workers delivering lunches just to this one office building. And it's fascinating to see how quickly it's become such a part of our daily lives.
Yeah. Dragana, part of what you discuss in your paper is how Uber came and sort of shook up the taxi industry, right? So can you just kind of give us a flavor of what happened there?
Yeah. So I learned about that event from a perspective of workers who were driving for Uber at that time. I was not driving at that time.
Mm-hmm.
So the story is based on their experience. They were saying that it was really good at the beginning. The pay was good. Uber drivers were very excited. However, things have quickly changed.
Mm-hmm.
And their salary and income, or in this case, we cannot call it salary, but income that they make, it significantly dropped. So initially, I see this event as almost like two-way street, because then the excitement soon enough was countered with workers' organization and protests. And hopefully we have some time to talk about that, because 2015 and 16 in Tampa, we witnessed also Uber drivers organizing, trying to manipulate the app by collectively deciding to, for example, park their car at the airport, but stay offline.
And you're saying this is 2015, 2016?
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think there's been more recent
And
occasions too in the Tampa region and elsewhere in Florida as well.
exactly.
Yeah.
And I think this is a trend from early on that we can maybe explore positive things that it embraced in terms of new opportunities, but then at the same time, precarious conditions and how drivers tried to improve their conditions while working on the platform.
Right, because when it comes in, it's sort of seen as like this is a disruptor. We are shaking up an industry that's been around for a long time, the taxi service. It's kind of a little bit staid. It's a bit kind of ossified in some ways, fossilized, but this is a real shake-up. And now Uber is the established kind of big player, and people are trying to say, well, wait a minute, we need to do something to improve our lot here. Jonathan, I want to bring you into this conversation now. You work as an Uber driver in Tallahassee in addition to your regular job. And in your book, you write about how you landed on the job as a way to make ends meet after some personal setbacks. When did you start driving for Uber, and what was it about Uber that made sense for you to start doing that kind of gig work?
So I picked up Uber driving as a second job because I had just gotten divorced and I kind of needed a little bit of extra income to make ends meet. At the time I was, parenting. I was, going through as a single parent. I had a full-time job, which was a good job, but I just needed a little extra, and I needed something that was both flexible and would allow me to work as much as I possibly could. And so it was difficult at first. Before I took on to Uber, I was working a second job in the local mall. And then I stumbled across Uber as an opportunity to be able to sort of pick my own hours and work as much as I wanted. And that was the big appeal. I did not have a good sense going into it that the working conditions were going to deteriorate over time. The money that was available at first has sort of steadily dwindled for drivers over the years. And so what starts off as an opportunity to control your hours becomes a situation where you end up working as many hours as you possibly can just to squeeze out every last dollar.
But isn't that partly because there are so many more people jumping on the app and saying they want to drive for Uber now? Because I imagine there probably weren't that many people doing it for a start, right?
Certainly. I mean, lots of people have signed up, but the gig economy has expanded in a lot of ways that I don't think were originally foreseen, to the point that now, you can have anything delivered. You can have your lunch delivered. You can call a ride. Uber actually operates a freight service that will do freight delivery. We're talking like over the road trucking kind of stuff. And it has infiltrated itself into a lot of different markets. And that gig economy model has kicked in a lot of different places. And everywhere that it's touched, it's a place that finds vulnerable people and lures them in with really big promises about earnings and income that largely turn out not to be true.
Ashley, as Jonathan was alluding to, Uber has become, the gig economy, I should say, has kind of expanded and is now part of a lot of different industries. What is different about the sharing economy, though, and how is that different from, say, part-time work?
I think that, especially at the Business Journal, we are sometimes guilty of overusing that something is the Uber of, right? The Uber of lawn mowing, the Uber of dog walking, those sorts of things. I think a lot of just on-demand services have tried to brand themselves as the Uber of, and of course we've seen an explosion of that.
And I mean, in some ways, it's a good thing, right? Because people may have, a car that they're not using. They may want to sort of put that on the road a little more and use it that way. If you talk about lawn mowing, I know there was a bit of a trend for people kind of lending out or renting out their yard equipment for a while. But at a certain point, it becomes something, it's sort of taken on a bit of a life of its own, hasn't it?
It really has. And is it a good thing? I think it's a double-edged sword. To Jonathan's point, the working conditions have deteriorated. You're seeing lower pay for people who do provide these services. And I think that's one reason you're seeing more people in Tampa Bay pursuing income this way is that costs here have risen so much. And this is a really low barrier to entry for a lot of people. If you have a car and a phone and can pass a background check, I think that you're in. And so it's interesting to see as our economy has grown and the folks who are kind of left behind in that, I think a lot of them are turning to the gig economy.
And you were just saying, as we record this conversation, you were making an observation about the number of people doing, food delivery around town. What other gigs are people doing besides, say, lawn work or other things like that? What have you noticed?
Those are the primary ones that I observe. I live in downtown Tampa, which lends itself very well to sort of that urban hermit lifestyle where you can get just about anything delivered. But even Amazon uses these sort of contract workers. A lot of your Amazon deliveries these days come from somebody using their personal vehicle.
Yeah, I've noticed that, or sometimes even like a van they've rented from U-Haul or something.
Right. So I think it's, companies are jumping on it to an extent and saying, hey, low barrier to entry, lower cost, putting more of the burden on the employee than it's your personal vehicle, wear and tear on that vehicle. So for a lot of these workers, it really is a double-edged sword. It may be an easy way to make money, but there's a lot of high costs to it as well.
You're listening to Florida Matters. I'm Matthew Petty. The conversation about the gig economy in Tampa Bay and Uber continues after this. You're listening to Florida Matters and a conversation about Uber and the gig economy in Tampa Bay. I'm Matthew Petty. You're hearing from Jonathan Rigsby, author of Drive, Scraping By in Uber's America, University of Tampa professor Dragana Mrvos, who studied Uber drivers in Tampa Bay, and Ashley Girbal Kritzer with the Tampa Bay Business Journal. Dragana, you spent a bit of time as an Uber driver, as we mentioned at the top of this conversation, and you did that so you could talk to other drivers about their experiences. Have you kept up with the Uber driving, or it was just like research, you're done, you're not doing it again?
I did a couple of times, but then later my car, to be honest, was old, and I didn't buy a new car. So the car that I have is 2007. So in fact, now they ask you for at least, I guess it's like 15 years or newer. So there is even that requirement, which you can imagine it can bring up a cost for you if you decide to drive and your car is newer model. So you have to pay maybe if, if it is not your car yet, or even if you're renting from Uber, again, you have this expense in that case. So that was the reason I couldn't drive any longer, but I wish I could. So maybe if I buy a new car, I can, sign up again and see if anything has changed. But I doubt that the things have changed.
Would you be doing it again just as kind of like professional interest, just to kind of keep that research going? Or is there a part of you who's like, I kind of enjoy driving people around and chatting to them?
No, it was not enjoyable, to be honest, because it's a very big risk. Especially, it's for everybody, but especially for a female. I had people who are drunk and they want to get in my car with their liquor, and then I have to argue with them to try to be nice and to explain that I can be in trouble because you're not allowed to get into my car with liquor. And then they would make different comments, and especially if you go drive at night, because I tried different time frame, because I was also calculating the wage. That was my goal, because if you want to understand, in fact, how much Uber driver makes, it's very difficult. So really you have to go and to create your own chart where you will have expenses and how much you pay for gas and everything else for your car. And that was my goal. And it would be my goal again, obviously, because it can hardly be enjoyable since you are not protected. There is no good regulation around it, so you are on your own.
There have been some steps, though, have there not, to kind of improve things, like make things a little safer? Like there have been some cases where Uber drivers have been in jeopardy or peril, and they've actually taken some steps to make things a little bit safer for drivers, haven't they?
Yeah, that's the true, but there is like a button 911, for example, but still you are the one who is there on spot, and it's your reaction. So many situations, obviously you can handle many situations, but you have to be very capable and aware of all possible risks. And I don't think that Uber as a company, is very interested in taking care of their drivers.
Jonathan, I wanted to come back to something that Dragana was talking about in terms of the car costs, because there are sort of like certain tiers, right? If you're driving for Uber, if you have a nicer car or a newer car, that you can kind of like drive at a higher level or charge it a little more. But what was your experience? Like what sort of did you discover when you were trying to stretch things out in terms of the money you were making while driving for Uber?
So if you have a particularly large vehicle, or if you have a luxury car, or say you have an electric car like a Tesla, you do qualify into other categories. Now that varies by city on whether or not that's available for the consumer to order. But you have to keep in mind that every hour that you're out there on the road, you're both burning fuel and putting wear and tear on your vehicle that eats into your earnings. And that, the cost of a car payment for a nicer or newer car can be prohibitive when it comes to trying to earn income through this platform. And Dragana talked about the safety risks and everything being borne sort of by the drivers themselves. Well, so are all the costs when it comes to things like oil changes and vehicle repairs and things like that. If you are out there putting all the wear and tear on the vehicle, you're fronting the vehicle, you're fronting the phone. All of that responsibility and risk is being taken on by you. And the company is more than happy, Uber especially, but gig economies in general, is more than happy to let you take those risks. I was actually quite violently assaulted by a passenger in 2018 in what turned into a 2-year legal saga. And the day after I was assaulted, I was contacted by Uber's safety team, and I asked them if they would pay for me to go to the hospital to get checked out, and that was not something that they were interested in providing.
Ashley, I'm just kind of thinking about geography and what that means for certain kinds of gig work. Like if you go to somewhere like New York City, you'll see food delivery people on bikes absolutely everywhere. Tampa, or basically any city in Florida where things are a little more spread out, you're going to see food delivery folks in cars, or maybe if you're in the villages, it might be golf cart. But is there something about the sort of geography of Florida that lends itself to certain kinds of gig work, do you think?
I think the tourism industry especially lends itself to a gig economy. Those folks come here, they need rides, they need help getting to and from the airport. But I will say I have a few times seen in downtown Tampa an Uber Eats delivery person on a motorbike.
Mm-hmm.
So it does exist here. I mean, we certainly don't have that many food delivery drivers on bicycles. I think you're right, they do mostly need cars, but I really think it's tourism that drives the gig economy here.
And I wonder about people who may be trying to cobble together a bunch of different gigs to make a living. Like, do you have a sense of what that might be like, or how many people might be trying to do that in the
I,
Tampa Bay region?
My sense is that it's just like our other service workers, and they're really struggling because housing prices have increased to the point that they cannot live close to the centers where they make money, right? If you're an Uber driver, you're going to want to be around some of these more dense urban areas like Water Street, downtown Tampa, and the price, to live here, it's just risen so drastically over the last 5 years. And I do know I truly do not take Uber very often myself, but usually when I have, and again, I live downtown, the driver has driven in from quite a distance from a suburb to drive around Tampa and make money. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that it's just, the state is sprawling. Tampa Bay is a very sprawling area, and those folks who need this to make money or who are trying to cobble together an income in the gig economy, like they have to drive a significant distance just to do that, just to be eligible for work.
Has taxi services, or traditional taxis as we know them, has that gone away totally? I mean, I feel like I do still see an odd taxi here and there. I mean, especially if you go to like the airport or something, you do see a taxi rank. But what's your sense of where that kind of industry's at right now?
I think that what we're seeing is a shift to more private car services, which is just like a sort of an upgraded Uber, or people that always own private car services are now saying, hey, with a little bit of technology, I can really get back in this game. I was just in Park City, Utah, and we hired a car service, and the experience was night and day, versus a traditional Uber. So I think that that's what we're seeing, is that we're seeing more of a high-end car service resurgence versus actual taxis, because nobody's waiting on the streets of downtown Tampa to hail a taxi. We're certainly not in a situation like that. But I think you're going to see more demand for private car services that you can schedule ahead of time. Like, you're going to an event, or you're going out on Water Street, and you can schedule that ahead of time and have your safe ride and have a little more confidence in who's showing up to get you.
Mm-hmm. Dragana, I see you nodding your head there. Does that kind of tally with what you've heard from the folks that you've talked to in the Uber kind of business?
Yeah, so I would like maybe to add that although Uber and the way it started was something new, and people were excited about it. At the same time, I think we need to go back to 2014 and to maybe analyze or at least stop and think how, in this case, taxi business was completely destroyed. There were obviously some issues, and even the drivers that I was talking to at that time were critical about the whole system with medallions.
Mm-hmm.
And
just for people who may not be aware, a medallion is like essentially a taxi license or something, right? It kind of you pay a certain amount of money for it, and that gives you the right to drive a taxi.
Correct. And there was, they argued a lot of corruption around it, but the fact that Uber was able to get in the market and to bypass all of the regulation that the previous professional driver or taxi need to have in order to work and be in the business, I don't think it's fair. And also, what happened really with people who had those medallions and had to pay for them, or like what was really the case with them? Because this can happen to nurses, which is a very prominent position in Florida. It can happen to hospitality workers. It can happen to every employer or employees in this case, because Uberization is a thing now. So although maybe it's not quantitatively dominant model in our economy yet or in Tampa, businesses are trying to implement this model because in this case, they don't have to pay their nurses. For example, if we compare with another position, and this was the same with the model that Uber had originally, drivers are not paid overtime. They don't have right for collective bargaining. They don't have any benefits that people who are really employees that they have. So Uber drivers are considered independent contractors, and that's not good for their rights. And if this becomes the case for every other profession or other professions which are very critical and important for us in Florida, it can become a really big issue.
Jonathan, just kind of coming back to you to wrap things up here, you're still driving for Uber, so there's obviously you're getting some value out of it still. Has something changed at all in your approach to how you go about driving rideshare, given the experience you've had over the years?
Absolutely. Before, when I would do this, there was a time when I was working 7 days a week. I would drive every single night. On Fridays and Saturday nights, I would be out until bars closed here in Tallahassee, which is 2 a.m. I calculated at one point that I hadn't had a weekend off in something like 2.5 years, which was a really brutal working environment. My situation has improved over the years. And so nowadays, I still go out every other Friday night to drive around the college kids in Tallahassee. And pretty soon the legislature will be here, so I'll get to have them as well. These hours that I was working before were extreme, but it was what I needed to do to get by. Nowadays, I do from 7 to 11, and I host a rideshare thread on Blue Sky where people can ride along with me and follow along with the people that I meet.
Aside from the money, which is obviously the main reason most people are looking to drive Uber, do you kind of enjoy those encounters you have, the conversations, as long as they're not sort of veering into uncomfortable territory?
I do enjoy it. The people, I always tell others, are the best and the worst part of it. A lot of times what you get when you have these encounters with people is you get to be sort of a single serving therapist for them. They may just need someone to talk to. At the same time, sometimes you get to be quiet and sort of witness these really touching or deep or really humorous moments between people. And so I enjoy the observation. I enjoy getting to see the people. I have had some really bad experiences as well, but I think overall I've come to the idea that I think it's mostly good, with the understanding that the workers that are doing this are taking on an awful lot of risk of something really bad happening.
We're going to have to leave it there, but I want to thank you all for your contributions to this conversation. Jonathan Rigsby is the author of Drive, Scraping By in Uber's America. Jonathan, thank you so much for your time. Also joined by Ashley Kritzer, business reporter and real estate editor for the Tampa Bay Business Journal. Ashley, thank you so much. And Dragana Mrvos, a professor of political science and international studies at the University of Tampa. Spent a few months as an Uber driver in Tampa for research while writing a paper, Surveillance, Capitalism and Control of Work, a study of Uber in Tampa Bay. Dragana, thank you as well. Uber says it has more than 8 million drivers and couriers around the world using the app each month, and it's been reported that Uber commands about 3/4 of the rideshare business in the US. I reached out to Uber to get their perspective on the gig economy in Tampa Bay and address some of the concerns raised by drivers. Javi Corioso is the Director of Public Affairs for Uber's South region. He said Uber doesn't discuss market share, but he says Tampa Bay has been good for the company.
A big component of that is the fact that more and more people are moving into our state, and that the Tampa Bay area particularly has grown so much in the last 10 years since Uber launched. When it comes to transit, something very unique to the Tampa Bay market is actually our partnership with the Pinellas Suncoast Transit Agency. That's a partnership that we launched almost 10 years ago now. It was one of the first transit partnerships that Uber had, and it's honestly just served as a model for the rest of the country in how Uber Transit can work with transit systems to grow and complement their existing transit plans and ridership.
Corioso said most drivers who use the app are driving for 20 hours or less per week, and they tend to be busier during the winter months when more tourists come to Florida. So I asked if drivers can make a full-time career out of it.
It depends on each person's use case. I've seen, in the 9 years that I've been at the company, I've seen drivers who drive full-time and do very, very well and, maximize their time on the platform depending on where they live and when they drive and how long they drive, and trying to prioritize very large events and concerts and venues, compared to other drivers who maybe are just doing it as a side hustle during the holidays because they need disposable income.
When it comes to the take-home pay for drivers, Corioso said the high cost of auto insurance is eating into drivers' profits. But he said Uber has been lobbying the Florida legislature to help stabilize the insurance market.
It's not that Uber's taking more of what the rider pays and keeping as a company. It's that the cost of insurance to cover that rider and that driver has risen so dramatically now that what drivers are seeing is that a component of what a rider pays is less so going to the driver and more so going to that insurance coverage.
And Corioso said Uber uses technology to help keep riders and drivers safe.
We have a safety button on the app that is not just available to riders, but also to drivers, where they can directly connect with 911. And we have technology that now, at least in the Tampa Bay area and most major metropolitan areas of the state, is connected to the first responder system, where right away first responders will get access to the GPS coordinates of where that car is located.
You can hear more of my conversation with Uber Public Affairs Director Javi Corioso, including the impact of robo-taxis, on the Florida Matters podcast. That's our show for this week. Florida Matters executive producer is Grayson Doctor. Engineering support from Jackson Harp and Blake Bass. Subscribe to Florida Matters wherever you get your podcasts and watch on YouTube. I'm Matthew Petty. Thank you for listening.